Hello, class. We have now reached chapter 27 of the Gospel of Matthew, and it's relatively long, so let's go ahead and get started. Let's look at verse number 1. Now when morning came, all the chief priests and elders of the people conferred together against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate the governor. Then when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, What is that to us? See to that yourself. And he threw the pieces of silver into the temple sanctuary and departed, and he went away and he hanged himself. Look at the commentary. The Sanhedrin, that's the council, decided that Jesus must die. But they did not have the authority to put that decision into action. To get a death sentence, they needed to take the case to Pilate, the governor, and Jesus, therefore, was bound and brought by the Jews to Pilate. So the Jews couldn't do it. They had to take him to the Romans. When Judas realized the outcome of the deliberations, he was filled with remorse and went back to the chief priests and elders. He knew he had betrayed innocent blood, for he admitted Jesus was not worthy of death. The religious leaders pointed out that that was his problem, not theirs. Judas decided he had to get rid of the money and he had received for betraying Jesus. It must have been a continual reminder of his action and convicted him of his sin. He went to the temple and threw the pieces of silver into the temple sanctuary. Then Judas went from the temple and hanged himself. Now we go to verse number 6. The chief priests took the pieces of silver and said, It is not lawful to put them into the temple treasury, since it is the price of blood. And they conferred together, and with the money bought the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. For this reason that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then that which was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. And they took the 30 pieces in silver, the price of the one whose price had been set by the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. Look at the commentary. The chief priests did not feel the money should be put into the temple coffers, since it was blood money. Yet they had no problems with giving it out in the very first place. Oh my. They decided to take the money and buy a parcel of land in which to bury foreigners. The parcel, which was a potter's field, became known as the field of blood. Matthew, in his gospel here we're studying, viewed these events as the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. That is the prophet Jeremiah. And also, not only Jeremiah's prophecy, but Zechariah's prophecy. However, Matthew only mentioned the major prophet by name. That would be Jeremiah. Look at verse 11. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, saying, Are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said to him, It is as you say. And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders of the Jews, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, Do you not hear how many things they testify against you? And he did not answer him with regard to even a single charge. So the governor, Pilate, was quite amazed. Look at the commentary. The kingship of Jesus was Matthew's main thing. When Pilate asked Jesus, Are you the king of the Jews? The answer came in the affirmative. But as John recorded, Jesus' kingdom at that time was not a political kingdom to rival that of Rome. Jesus was no threat to Roman rule. Pilate realized that and sought to release Jesus. While Jesus was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer for he was not being tried for those accusations. Instead, he was on trial because they said he claimed to be the king of the Jews, the Messiah. Since Pilate had already declared Jesus' innocence, there was no reason for him to answer the accusations. Now we go to verse number 15. Now at the feast of the governor, Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the people any one prisoner whom they wanted. This is the feast of the Passover. At that time, they were holding a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the people gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that because of envy they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him a message saying, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him." Now look at the commentary. Pilate had been warned by his wife to be careful how he dealt with this prisoner, that is Jesus, for he was an innocent man. Since Pilate believed Jesus was innocent, he tried to have him released. It was a custom of the governor to release a prisoner each year at the Passover in order to gain acceptance with the Jews. His plan to bring about the release of Jesus involved a notorious prisoner named Barabbas, an insurrectionist, a murderer. Pilate thought that surely the people of the nation loved Jesus, their king, and that only the religious leaders were envious of him. He reasoned that if the people had a choice, they would surely release Jesus, not the notorious Barabbas. Now we go to verse number 20. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. But the governor said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Crucify him." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they kept shouting all the more, saying, "Crucify him." Now we'll look at the commentary. However, the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. When Pilate asked the crowd what he should do with Jesus, who is called Christ, they all answered, "Crucify him." One can almost picture this scene, somewhat like a football stadium in which the crowds shout, "Defense!" The cheer instead was, "Crucify! Crucify!" When Pilate sought further information from the crowd as to Jesus' crimes, the crowd simply shouted louder, "Crucify!" Now we look at verse number 24. When Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that a riot was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves." And all the people said, "His blood be upon us," said the Jews, "and on our children." Then Pilate released Barabbas for them, but after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. So now we look at the commentary. Pilate, realizing he was getting nowhere with the Jewish crowd and their threats to report him to Caesar, concerned him. His record with Caesar was not good, and he did not want word of a rival king to reach Caesar's ears, especially if Pilate had released that king. Pilate therefore took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, symbolizing his desire to absolve himself from being involved in putting an innocent man to death. But his words, "I am innocent of this man's blood," did not make him innocent. Such an act did not remove Pilate's guilt from this travesty of injustice. So doing this symbolic action of washing his hand didn't make Pilate innocent at all. And finally, when Pilate turned the responsibility over to the Jews, however, they readily accepted it. They said, "His blood shall be on us and our children." In spite of Pilate's 4 declarations already of Jesus' innocence, and we see the references there, he fulfilled his commitment to the Jews by releasing Barabbas and turning Jesus over for crucifixion after he had been flogged. Verse 27. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole Roman cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and after twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand, and they knelt down before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on Jesus and took the reed and began to beat him on the head. And after they had mocked him, they took the scarlet robe off him and put his own garments back on him and led him away to crucify him. Now we look at the commentary. Jesus was brought into the praetorium, where there was about a cohort of 600 Roman soldiers. There they removed his clothing, mocked him by putting on him a scarlet robe, which is clothing for a king. They put a crown of thorns on his head and gave him a staff for a scepter. They knelt down before him and mocked him by saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They degraded him further by spitting on him and striking him on the head again and again with the staff. Unknown to them, their actions fulfilled the words of Isaiah's prophecy concerning the Savior's marring. With their mockery completed, the soldiers again dressed Jesus in his own clothes and led him away to be crucified. Verse 32 reads, "As they were coming out, they found a man of Cyrene named Simon, whom they pressed into service to bear his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they gave him wine to drink mixed with gall, and after tasting it he was unwilling to drink. And when they had crucified him, they divided up his garments among themselves by casting lots. And sitting down, they began to keep watch over him there. And above his head they put up the charge against him, which read, 'This is Jesus, the King of the Jews.'" Now we look at the commentary. Simon of Cyrene, which is a city in North Africa, was forced to carry the cross when Jesus could no longer carry it himself, being weak from the beatings. Eventually, the procession came to a place known as Golgotha, which in Aramaic means the place of a skull. Actually, this was a hill that resembled a skull. Jesus was then offered wine mixed with gall, a drink given to dull the senses and make the pain of crucifixion somewhat easier to bear. After tasting it, though, Jesus refused any more, for he wanted to be in complete control of his senses, even while hanging on the cross. The actual crucifixion was just briefly noted by Matthew. But Matthew did record the dividing of Jesus' clothes by those crucifying him. Over Jesus' head on the cross was written, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews," for that truly was the charge for which Jesus was dying and for which he was accused by the Jews as blasphemy. Now we look at verse number 38. At that time, 2 robbers were crucified with Jesus, one on the right and one on the left. And those passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him and saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now, if he delights in him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" Jesus was crucified, we see in the commentary now, between 2 robbers. While Jesus was hanging on the cross, he was subject to continual verbal abuse by those passing by. In mockery, they recall what Jesus had said earlier about destroying the temple and raising it up 3 days later. Surely he must be a false leader, they thought, because his alleged ability to destroy the temple was now gone. He had previously saved others, but he now could not save himself. They said if he could come down from the cross, they would believe in him. One wonders, however, if even such an act as this would even have prompted them to believe. Now we look at verse 44. The robbers who had been crucified with him were also insulting him with the same words. Now from the 6th hour darkness fell upon all the land until the 9th hour. About the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," that is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of those who were standing there, when they heard it, began saying, "This man is calling for Elijah." Look at the commentary. Besides the passersby and the religious leaders, the robbers crucified with Jesus, one on each side, the right and the left, also insulted him. Luke, however, recorded that a change of heart took place in one of the robbers. The irony of this scene was that Jesus could have done the things the crowd was shouting for him to do, but it was not in the Father's will that he do that. Matthew noted that from the 6th hour, that is noon, until the 9th hour, that is 3 p.m. in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. In this period of darkness, Jesus became the sin offering for the world, and as such was forsaken by the Father. Near the end of this period of time, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some of those standing near the cross misunderstood what he was saying. They heard the word Eli, but thought Jesus was trying to call for Elijah. In Greek, the word Elijah sounds more like Eli than it does in English. Now we look at verse 48. Immediately one of them ran, and taking a sponge, he filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave him a drink. But the rest of them said, "Let us see whether Elijah will come to save him." And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from the top down to the bottom, and the earth shook an earthquake, and the rocks were split when Jesus gave up the spirit and died. Look at the commentary. Thinking Jesus' lips and throat had become dry, someone thought a drink of wine vinegar would moisten the vocal cords so he could speak plainly. Others, however, said to leave Jesus alone and see if Elijah would come and deliver him. Their jeers were obviously still being directed against him. With one last cry, Jesus gave up his spirit, committing it to the hands of the Father. Jesus was in complete control of his life, and he died at the precise moment he determined by dismissing his spirit. At the time of Jesus' death, the curtain of the temple separating the holy place from the Holy of Holies was torn in two. The fact that it was torn from top to bottom signified that God is the one who ripped the thick curtain. God was showing that the way of access into his presence was now available for everyone, and not simply the Old Testament high priest. Now we see verse 52. The tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many people. Now the centurion and those who were with him keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, they became very frightened, and they said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Now look at the commentary. Moreover, Matthew records that the tombs of many saints, that is, people of faith, were opened probably at a Jerusalem cemetery. Most likely the tombs broke open at Christ's death by the powerful earthquake, thus heralding Christ's triumph and death over sin. But the bodies were not raised until after Christ was raised, since Christ is the first fruits of the dead. A Roman centurion and other Roman guards were terrified at all the unusual circumstances surrounding the death of Jesus. Their response was, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Then we see in verse 55, many women were there looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee while ministering to him. Among them were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea, named Joseph, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. Look at the commentary. Also, some women were there, observing from a distance. These women had followed Jesus from Galilee and had been ministering to him. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, the mother of the sons of Zebedee. The Apostle John mentioned that Mary, Jesus' mother, and Mary's sister were also present at the foot of the cross. No known preparation had been made for Jesus' burial. However, a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph asked Pilate for Jesus' body. He was a member of the Sanhedrin, but had not agreed with the council's decision to crucify Jesus. Instead, he was one who had been looking for the kingdom of God and was a believer in Jesus as the Messiah. Pilate granted his request. We see now in verse 59, and Joseph of Arimathea took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his own tomb, which he had hewn out in the rock, and he rolled a large stone against the entrance of the tomb and went away. And Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary sitting opposite the grave. Now we look at the commentary. Another account reported Joseph was assisted in the burial by Nicodemus, that is John's gospel. These two men took the body of Jesus and followed burial customs of the time. They wrapped the body in linen with a mixture of myrrh and aloes, spices used in burial. This procedure was done rapidly in order to be completed before the Sabbath began at nightfall. Joseph placed the wrapped body in his own new tomb cut out of the rock near the place of crucifixion. Joseph and Nicodemus rolled a large stone against the entrance of the tomb and went away. Matthew noted that Mary Magdalene and the other Mary sat across from the tomb, no doubt in mourning. Interestingly, these women accompanied Jesus' body right up to the minute it was buried, whereas Jesus' disciples had all abandoned him. And now we come to verse 62. Now on the next day, the day after the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver," referring to Jesus, after 3 days, I am going to rise again. Therefore give orders for the grave to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people, he has risen from the dead. And the last deception will be worse than the first. Pilate said to them, "You have a guard. Go, make it as secure as you know how." And they went and made the grave secure, and along with the guard they set a seal also on the stone. Now we look at the commentary. The very next day after Jesus' death, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate and informed him of Jesus' words. After 3 days, this is his words, "I am going to rise again." While they did not believe Jesus' words, they feared his disciples might come and steal his body and fabricate a resurrection lie. If this were to happen, the deception would be worse than anything Jesus had accomplished in his life. Pilate agreed with their suggestion and ordered that a guard be sent to the tomb to make it as secure as possible. The Roman guard sealed the tomb, but also continued to keep guard at the scene itself as well. So their presence made stealing the body virtually impossible. And that is the end of this lecture on chapter 27.